Every report wants the same bones: time, temperature, tools. For 23 years I have trusted that if the frame is sound, the image will hold. I do not pray. I calibrate. I do not hope. I measure. In this hall, rationality is not a preference but a climate. The vaulted brick ribs overhead gather sound and give it back a heartbeat late. Fluorescent bars hum, 2 of them stuttering, so that half the room is institutional white and half amber from the old brass sconces. Formalin, damp plaster, steel, odors I no longer register as unpleasant, settle on the tongue like a mineral film. Dust spirals in the lamplight above the iron catwalks where generations of students leaned and whispered, thinking the dead could not hear. Anatomy is not study. It is listening, I tell them at the start of every term. The listening is literal. The tap of instrument on bone, the soft tear of fascia, the slow exhale of trapped preservative when a cavity opens. The body is a text, and scars are its marginalia. Nothing ever speaks back. Past reliables parade in my mind to steady the hands. The whale fetus suspended like a question mark. The ossified lung that rang when you tapped it. The twin conjoined hearts that could be understood once you trace the plumbing. Each yielded to description. Description is a solvent. We rolled the new crate in from the crypt. Frost ghosted the slats. The manifest was insultingly thin. Female, approx 40 origin archive. Across the lid, half-erased Cyrillic, as if the wood had been taught a language and asked to forget it. Reinhardt, my pathology resident, rapped the corner with a knuckle and grinned. The handwriting looks like yours, Professor. A harmless joke, filed and discarded. Inside, the familiar gray stillness, the skin's museum pallor. I did what I always do first, mapped the visible injuries, the healed and the healing no longer. A crescent abrasion on the dorsal hand, 2 shallow lines across the palm. I wrote coincidences of function, the trivial resemblances we all earn by using the same tools in the same world. The hall exhaled. A drop of condensation fell from an arch and hit tile like a metronome tick. I capped my fountain pen. Ink bled faintly along the paper fibers, and for a moment I smelled not ethanol, but iron gall, the exact bite of my office ink, though I had mixed today's batch 3 floors up and 2 corridors away. When we recovered the body, the left knee caught my eye, a faint pale ridge just superior to the patella, the kind left by gravel and a child's poor breaking. I have that scar. Most people do. The mind loves patterns. The hand dislikes superstition. I logged it without exaggeration and closed the file. As we stripped the table and dimmed the fluorescents, the echoes did their usual trick, my own good night returning to me a half-beat late, as if the hall were rehearsing my words. Tomorrow would be the first incision, standard ventral line, scalpel number 20, long stroke to spare the tissue. Dead tissue does not change. It cooperates. That is the point of the dead. I left the recorder running anyway, just in case something chose, for once, to answer. I opened the hall an hour before dawn so the room could reach its working temperament. Metal wakes slowly. Tile accepts light in stages. I logged the ambient. 18.2 digs relative humidity, 61%. The fluorescent stuttered into cooperation. Reinhardt arrived with the instruments wrapped in blue cloth, his hair damp from the fog outside. We do not begin with drama. We begin with a ventral midline incision, a single steady stroke from sternum to pubis. In lay terms, one clean cut along the middle, so planes of tissue open like the pages of a book. Scalpel number 20, my hand, not the resident's. Document, I said, and heard my tone flatten into its teaching register. He clicked the analog recorder's red eye and set a clock. The first slide of steel through preserved skin felt wrong, not in the way of resistance, but of give. Ethanol-fixed tissue should cut like dense fruit, grainy, obedient. This yielded almost elastically. and then settled back 0.5 millimeter, as if reconsidering the insult. I paused, let the blade rest. Pressed again. Note, I said, unexpected flexibility of dermis and superficial fascia. Then, in simple terms for the future reader who will not love jargon, the skin and the thin, silvery film beneath it moved like they belonged to the living. We advanced in layers. Fine scissor dissection opened the left thigh to expose the knee. A small thing. The blade tip caught in what I took for dried adhesive near the patella. I irrigated. The surface resolved into pale crescent scar tissue, exactly where a child's bicycle would have left it, superolateral to the kneecap. The ridge's length and curve matched the one on my own leg so closely my hand forgot the table for a second and went to my skirt hem. I did not look. Looking is indulgence. Measuring is work. Calipers, I said. Edge-to-edge length 31.4 mm, offset from patellar midpoint 12 mm. I dictated the numbers the way a frightened person recites a prayer. Coincidence, Reinhardt muttered, sympathetic and unworried. He was right to be unworried. The world is full of matching shapes. Still, I felt that small internal tilt I associate with misfiled facts. Verification is the antidote to tilt. We took the limb to imaging. For context, a CT scan gives you thin slices of bone and soft tissue. Picture a loaf of bread cut into transparent pieces you can stack and compare. I authorized an overlay against my own childhood medical film, pulled from employee health records with the bland shame of self-importance. Reinhardt worked the workstation, mapping angles and lengths. The screen resolved to a composite and locked. The microfracture pattern along the distal radius, mine, age 11, matched a stress signature in the cadaver's radius with improbable fidelity. In simple terms, 2 broken arms, decades and identities apart, wore the same fingerprint of healing. A cadaver does not generate new trauma, I said for the recorder. It preserves what it once owned. The axiom sounded solid out loud. It felt brittle in my mouth. Back in the hall, I cut a punch biopsy from the knee scar for histology. That means a tiny circle of skin and scar is removed to look at under a microscope. We stained the collagen and mounted the slide. Collagen should lie like bundled ropes after death, fixed, inert, under polarized light, a method that makes fiber orientation glow. The bands reorganized over 30 minutes, shifting from haphazard to aligned, the way living tissue remodels in response to stress. Dead cells do not remodel. To explain this without insult, it was as though the pages of an old closed book had begun rewriting themselves into a diary, as if the paper remembered ink. Reinhardt leaned closer, breath fogging the eyepiece. Artifact, he said. Temperature drift. Polarizer slip. He wanted it to be a trick of the instrument because tricks can be corrected. I rotated the stage. The alignment held, and then, impossibly, tightened to a pattern I recognized from an old photograph of my bandaged knee. I did not tell him that then. I wrote instead, collagen exhibits time-linked order increase, non-viable tissue behaving as if viable. When I transcribed it to the main log, my hand, substituted a word, me, instead of subject. I crossed it out so firmly the paper bruised. Context precedes conclusion. I laid out the other anomalies in a row like instruments, flexibility, matched scar, congruent microfractures, remodeling slide. 1 coincidence is ordinary. 4 have a posture. I sealed the hall. That is not melodrama. It is procedure. Restricted access, signage on the main door, card reader disabled. Suspend auxiliary dissections, I told Reinhardt. He protested, mildly from duty more than conviction. I'll cite preservative shortage, I said, and logged the lie. We shut the vents to minimum. The air turned still enough to hear the lamp's filaments shift. The lights grew louder in that way machines do when you've denied yourself other noise. The brass sconces threw an amber tide along the brick ribs, and in that softer light the face on the table seemed different, the jawline less square, the chin finer. Shadows invent, I reminded myself, but shadows need a host. I covered 47B to the clavicles and stood at the head of the table, a position I use only when speaking to students. Tomorrow, I said to Reinhardt, we repeat every measure under blind conditions. In lay terms, we will make the test so boring the truth has nowhere to hide. He left with the tapes. I stayed long enough to hear the building return my footfalls half a beat late, as if it were practicing being me. In the dark, the refrigerator units clicked on in sequence, a metallic peristalsis traveling the room. From the covered body came nothing at all. No twitch. No drip. Only the quiet insistence of pose. I locked the hall and took the key, certain that the next day would either dismiss the pattern or draw it tighter around my throat. By the third morning, the hall felt colder than its readings. Metal gurneys held a light skin of condensation, and my own breath came visible when I leaned over the steel. The thermostat swore fidelity to 18-degree king, but the air had gone thin, the way a chapel feels before confession. I began at 0610 hours. Protocol: measure, document, observe, repeat. Every anomaly deserves repetition until it confesses to error. I no longer believed in coincidence, but belief is not evidence. Reinhardt arrived late, his voice muffled by the mask. You haven't slept. I ignored the observation. Observation does not affect the specimen, I replied, quoting the false comfort of science. We peeled back the covering sheet. Subject 47B looked less gray than memory allowed. The faint bruise tones under the skin had warmed to something approximating circulation. Beneath the overhead lamp, the left thigh reflected a living sheen, not preservative gloss. I touched the surface with a gloved finger. Warm. The glove fogged slightly. Methodical examination. I began a full-body survey. Each lesion was mapped, measured, logged. The scar on the left knee remained precise. No further alteration. But across the right forearm, new linear disruptions had appeared, arranged in parallel. Healed lacerations no wider than hairlines. Reinhardt frowned. You didn't cut there. I would remember, I said. We used the caliper, measured the spacing. 2.8 millimeters apart. Exactly the distance between the burns I once sustained, sterilizing a blade in my early fellowship year. I had not thought of that day in 20 years. I dictated carefully. Subject 47B exhibits new scarification consistent with healed burns, unaccounted for in prior notes. For readers unfamiliar with tissue chronology, when skin heals, collagen lays down in ordered ropes, a form of structural handwriting. These ropes reveal when and often why damage occurred. In this specimen, the handwriting now followed my biography. Reinhardt cleared his throat. Temporal correlation, purely accidental. Accident implies two moving parts, I said. We have only one. Controlled tests verification eliminates madness. I selected 2 control cadavers, standard ethanol-fixed donors from the student vault. Reinhardt would perform identical incisions while I observed. No deviation in tissue elasticity, no spontaneous scarring. Then we reversed roles. I made the same cuts, in the same sequence on the controls. Within an hour, faint texturing appeared beneath the epidermis. Fibroblast bloom, an impossible flare of cellular repair. The effect was smaller, slower, but undeniable. Perhaps it's your handling, Reinhardt murmured. Contamination by touch, pheromones, something chemical. To remove myself from the process, I tried mechanical intermediaries. First long-handled tongs, then a robotic arm designed for precision scalpels. Still, wherever my commands traveled, the tissue began to shift. Slow waves under the light, fibers twisting into configurations that mimicked my scars. He stared at the microscope output. That's correlation. It's mimicry, I said. He snorted. then the corpse admires you. Scientific escalation. In the adjoining lab, I prepared a spectral protein assay, a comparison of specific amino sequences between specimen and myself. I swabbed the interior of my cheek, a trivial personal intrusion, and logged the chain ID, S-alpha. The result took 6 hours. The peaks, those fingerprint-like rises of protein resonance, overlapped perfectly. Reinhardt's face tightened. Cross-contamination. You touched the slide. I did not. He turned to the logbook, riffling for error. Impossible, then. Yes, I said. Precisely that. For those who do not live in the lab, protein resonance matching at this scale means 2 samples share biological authorship. In common language, our tissues were speaking the same dialect, word for word. Reinhardt paced. You'll want to repeat this in sterile conditions. I already had. 3 times. Same result. The corpse was not just imitating, it was converging. Environmental shift by the 5th night, the air refused to clear. Humidity condensed on the metal rafters and fell in slow, rhythmic intervals, like a leaking metronome. The brick walls had begun to sweat. The instruments, untouched overnight, glistened with fine moisture each morning. I replaced the desiccants twice, checked the vents. No malfunction. The echo lag, that half-second delay of sound unique to this hall, lengthened, as if the room's memory had grown deeper. When I spoke, my voice returned with a tremor of variance, a near harmonic that was not my tone, but something approximating it. Reinhardt dismissed it as poor acoustics. He did not hear the whisper I heard embedded in the return. Not echo exactly, more like agreement. At 23:47, while cataloging muscle samples, I heard movement in the storage tanks. The sound was subtle, wet fabric adjusting itself or tissue under strain. The fluid level in Tank C rose 3 centimeters overnight without addition. I logged the anomaly. For context, evaporation reduces fluid, never increases it. The only source of gain is displacement, something entering the fluid. The next morning, Reinhardt found me seated beside the table, eyes open, recorder running. I had apparently fallen asleep mid-dictation. Playback revealed 40 seconds of soft stretching noises, like paper tearing underwater. He asked how long I had been awake. I could not answer with confidence. Thematic escalation. Shu-I turned to philosophy because data had ceased to behave. The mind must have walls when the instruments rebel. My notes from that night read more confession than report. Perhaps we dissect not to learn the body, but to teach it who we are. Each incision a lesson, each suture a signature. The handwriting on that page slants differently, sharper, less deliberate, like another hand borrowed mine. That night I dreamt of the hall lit entirely by the amber sconces. My younger self stood at the table, hair unpinned, blade poised. The cadaver was me, the instructor was her. We alternated roles without pause, cutting and being cut, each explaining the anatomy of the other. I woke to find my pen uncapped, a blot of ink spread across the open log. My fountain pen emits a faint scent of iron gall. The blot smelled faintly of blood instead. Reinhardt entered as I sealed the notebook. "You look worse," he said, which was his version of compassion. "I'm well," I told him, "but I think the body is remembering faster now." He gave a short, nervous laugh. "Bodies don't remember. Brains do." "Then why?" I asked. "Does my skin feel like it's studying me?" The hall answered with its half-second echo, returning my question in perfect imitation. "Tomorrow, I will biopsy again, and if the pattern continues, I will stop referring to subject 47B as an object. It deserves a pronoun. For now, I will sleep or try to, knowing that somewhere beneath this floor, preserved tissue lies awake, rehearsing my anatomy like a song it has decided to learn by heart. The hall had grown too quiet. Not the comforting silence of order and refrigeration, but the kind that follows the moment you realize the sound you depended on has stopped. Even the buzz of the fluorescents seemed to hesitate, as though the current itself was listening. Reinhardt was the first to mention it. "The recorder picked up something," he said, sliding a spool of analog tape across the counter toward me. His handwriting on the label, Session 7, Knee Revision, 2340. I threaded the tape through the old Grundig player, our habit for redundancy when digital systems corrupted under humidity. The moment the reel began to turn, I heard my own voice. Clear, measured, dictating incision depth. But beneath it, half a syllable late, came the same words, fainter, more organic, like an echo through lungs instead of walls. "Feedback," I said automatically. He shook his head. The mic was unplugged when I rewound. I stopped the player. The silence that followed felt wrongly shaped, as if the air still contained residue of speech. Anatomical note, I recorded afterward. Unexpected auditory artifact. Cadence identical to operator's own. Delayed 0.4 seconds. That number was not a guess. It matched precisely the acoustic lag of the hall's architecture. In other words, the sound was behaving like the room itself had joined the conversation. Auditory phenomenon during the next session, I kept the recorder running deliberately. The whisper repeated only during direct contact with tissue. When I probed the thoracic cavity, a faint consonant murmur followed each dictation, reshaping my words as I spoke them. Not mimicry, continuation. Reinhardt replayed the tape, adjusting gain. The whisper said, "Continue." He laughed. An academic defense. "Audio pareidolia," he said. "Our brains find patterns in static, like hearing words in rainfall." I explained. "Pareidolia requires randomness. This has structure." He closed the notebook without answering. I noted the gesture. Denial is simply another tool for measuring distance from terror. Morphological progression by the 10th day the face had changed. Not dramatically, just specifics. The bridge of the nose had narrowed. The jaw tapered. When I measured the intercanthal distance, the span between eyes, it matched my own biometric reading to the 10th of a millimeter. Reinhardt tried humor again. "If it starts grading papers, we're cursed." I didn't respond. I was tracing the faint outline of a dimple at the left cheek. "I have one." The cadaver did not. Under the lab's flat light, the resemblance was faint, but undeniable. The dead have no reason to flatter. Imitation here was not vanity, but communication. When I leaned close, the scent was wrong. No formalin, only something faintly ozonic, like the charge after lightning or a photocopier left running. "Observation," I dictated, facial morphology trending toward operator parameters. "Structural mimicry, not decay." My gloved fingers trembled, and the recorder caught the sound, a faint tap like a heartbeat. On playback, the second heartbeat was slower, half a syllable behind. Scientific escalation, the three eye returned to histology. A fresh biopsy, small sample from the right deltoid. Under the microscope, muscle fibers shone clean, ordered. Then within minutes they began rotating their alignment. Not chemical breakdown. Active organization. At the same moment I felt an irritation on my forearm, a small sting. When I rolled back my sleeve I saw a narrow red welt. I'd burned myself that morning sterilizing a scalpel. The slide beneath the microscope now displayed an identical welt. Same dimensions, same angle. I spoke into the recorder. "This is impossible. Dead cells cannot register external current events." Then, for clarity, even if memory persists in tissue, it cannot acquire new information. I took a second sample from deeper tissue. No change. A control from another cadaver, sterile, inert, remained unchanged. Only 47B responded to my pulse, my breath, my injury. Reinhardt began writing his notes in block capitals. I think he was trying to distance himself from the words. Breakdown of control late that evening, as we were preparing to close. The abdomen of the specimen expanded, subtle at first, then visibly, as though drawing breath. The formalin fluid around it trembled in concentric rings. I froze. Pressure fluctuation, Reinhardt said too quickly. But the manometer held steady. A thin exhale escaped through the main incision. A hiss, soft and human in cadence. The lab's instruments, beakers, metal trays, rattled for an instant, then fell still. Reinhardt moved to shut off the valves. "Don't," I said, louder than intended. He paused, hand on the regulator. Something had happened in that second. Something that redefined containment. For the first time, the corpse had expelled matter. We both stepped back. "Residual gas," he said. "From decomposition. Decomposition produces methane. This was air." "Air from where?" I didn't answer. He left moments later, muttering about equipment calibration. I stayed, watching the surface tension of the fluid settle like the breath of a sleeping animal. As I bent to shut the recorder, I saw it. My reflection in the stainless table. Only it blinked. I did not. Thematic escalation. Number 3I. Reviewed my written notes that night. Something was off in the handwriting. Letters leaned slightly forward, as if reaching out. My name, Schäfer, had begun to lose its umlaut, as though anglicizing itself to become easier to pronounce. I do not remember doing that. The tone of the entries had changed too. Detached precision giving way to confession. We name the body to separate it from ourselves. When names fail, only resemblance remains. I stared at the line for several minutes, trying to recall when I'd written it. My fountain pen was dry. My hand ached as though I'd been writing for hours. The hall felt larger that night, the echoes longer. Every sound returned slightly older than it had left. From the darkness of the specimen tank came a small click, metal against glass. Then faintly, under the residual hum of the fluorescents, a voice, half a syllable behind mine, whispering the word, "Remember." It wasn't command or echo. It was recognition. I closed the recorder, sealed the log, and for the first time in 23 years, left the hall without turning off the lights. Behind me, through the locked door, the fluorescents hummed. Not steady, not random, in rhythm with my pulse. When I arrived that morning, the lock on the hall door refused my key. Not jammed, reprogrammed. Reinhardt was already inside. His face looked bloodless in the fluorescence, hands trembling as he gestured toward the control panel. "The power surged at 04 he said. "System rebooted and sealed us in. I've tried everything." Behind him, the security door to the lower crypt had also latched shut. Containment mode. I had not activated it. The cadaver lay uncovered. No sheet, no restraints, and she, because I can no longer call it, had changed again. Every angle, every proportion, every scar, mine. I knew that skin like I knew my handwriting. The faint surgical notch behind the left ear from my postgraduate biopsy. The thin white crescent at the wrist from glass in my student days. Subject 47B had become me at 40. "Christ," Reinhardt whispered. Yes, I said. He didn't finish. The word would have been you. Total containment. The vents had shut themselves during the night. The air in the hall now carried the copper note of breath held too long. I logged the situation with deliberate precision. Containment automatic. Hull sealed. 2 personnel present. Specimen identical to primary operator in gross anatomy. Reinhardt's panic came in waves. Shallow breathing. Pacing. "We should burn it," he said. "Ethanol-based fixation, 1 spark. No." "Then what the hell do you call this?" "Continuity," I answered. He stared at me as if the word itself had betrayed me. "You think this is continuity?" "Destruction is ignorance's defense mechanism," I said. "Fire won't erase data. It will only scatter it. The lights flickered, each pulse slower than the last. The hall's hum had become rhythmic, like a pulse trying to keep us synchronized. Recovered archives. We searched for power relays in the sub-basement, hoping to override the system. Instead, we found a small, rusted metal case, half buried beneath the old pathology ledgers. Inside, a 16mm film reel, labeled in fading ink. Schäfer, Ingrid, Demonstration 1994. I felt the world tilt, the way it does when you stand after surgery. "That's your name," Reinhardt said quietly. "I know." We threaded the reel into the projector in the seminar alcove. The image flickered onto the tiled wall, stuttering through dust. There I was, or rather a younger version, hair darker, movements brisker, conducting a demonstration on a female specimen. The specimen. Same scars, same table, same hall.